The atmospheric pattern that unleashed Winter Storm Fern is far from finished with the United States. While millions of Americans are still dealing with the devastating aftermath of one of the most significant winter storms in recent memory, meteorologists are already tracking signs of another potentially major storm system that could develop within the next 7 to 10 days. The same atmospheric configuration that produced Winter Storm Fern remains locked in place across North America, creating conditions that not only favor continued storm development, but could produce an event that rivals or even exceeds the impacts we just witnessed. This developing situation represents more than just another winter weather threat on the extended forecast. The persistent disruption of the polar vortex that drove Winter Storm Fern has established an atmospheric pattern that acts like a storm factory, creating repeated opportunities for significant weather systems to develop and track across portions of the United States that are still recovering from the previous event. Understanding why this next storm system could be even more dangerous than Winter Storm Fern requires examining the current state of the atmosphere and how the conditions that produced the previous storm have actually intensified rather than weakened. The stratospheric warming event that collapsed the polar vortex continues to reverberate through the atmospheric system, maintaining the southward displacement of the jet stream that creates the temperature contrasts necessary for major storm development. The temperature gradient between the persistent Arctic air mass covering much of the eastern United States and the relatively warmer air masses to the south has actually sharpened in the wake of Winter Storm Fern. This enhanced temperature contrast creates what meteorologists call a baroclinic zone, an atmospheric feature that serves as a breeding ground for storm systems that can rapidly intensify as they tap into these strong thermal gradients. Current long-range forecasting models are showing remarkable consistency in depicting the development of a significant weather system during the first week of February, with the European model, American GFS, and Canadian ensembles all suggesting similar atmospheric evolution patterns. While the exact track and intensity of this potential storm remain uncertain at this extended range, the atmospheric pattern supporting its development shows little sign of weakening or shifting away from a configuration that favors major winter weather events. Multiple global forecast models are converging on a solution that places this developing system in a position to affect similar geographic regions to those impacted by Winter Storm Fern, but with potentially different precipitation types and intensity distributions. The ECMWF ensemble shows the highest probability for a significant storm system developing between February 3rd and 6th. The Canadian ensemble model provides perhaps the most concerning outlook, suggesting the possibility of multiple storm systems developing in quick succession rather than a single large event. This multi-storm scenario could create a prolonged period of active weather spanning potentially 2 weeks or more. The timing of this next potential storm system creates particularly concerning implications for regions that experienced significant impacts from Winter Storm Fern. Infrastructure damage from the previous event, including compromised power grids, damaged tree canopies, and overwhelmed snow removal equipment, could compound the impacts of another major winter weather event occurring so soon after the first. But this is where the meteorological setup becomes even more complex and potentially dangerous than what we experienced with Winter Storm Fern. The atmospheric pattern currently in place differs from the configuration that produced Winter Storm Fern in several key ways that could make the next storm system more intense and potentially more widespread. The polar vortex disruption has continued to evolve, creating an even more pronounced southward bulge of Arctic air that extends deeper into the continental United States than what existed during the Fern event. This enhanced cold air penetration means that the next storm system will have access to an even larger reservoir of Arctic air than Winter Storm Fern did. When this cold air interacts with moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean, the potential exists for a storm system that could produce more significant snow accumulations across a broader area than the previous event. The jet stream configuration supporting this developing pattern also shows signs of being more amplified than during the Winter Storm Fern timeframe. An amplified jet stream pattern creates stronger upper-level divergence, a meteorological process that enhances the development and intensification of surface low-pressure systems. This means that storm systems developing in this pattern have greater potential for rapid intensification than might otherwise be expected. Long-range ensemble forecasting data suggests multiple possible scenarios for how this next storm system could evolve, each presenting unique challenges and impact potentials that emergency planners and weather-sensitive industries must consider. The most concerning scenario involves the development of a rapidly intensifying low-pressure system that tracks from the southern plains northeastward through the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Atlantic and northeast regions, following a similar path to Winter Storm Fern, but with potentially greater intensity and longer duration impacts. This primary scenario shows the developing storm system tapping into enhanced moisture transport from both the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean, creating conditions that could support snow accumulation rates exceeding 2 inches per hour across broad areas. The combination of enhanced moisture and strong atmospheric lift could produce total snow accumulations of 18 to 30 inches across the primary impact zone. The rapid intensification potential of this scenario creates particular concerns for meteorological forecasting accuracy and public preparation time. Storm systems that intensify quickly often undergo bombogenesis, a process where central pressure drops rapidly and wind speeds increase dramatically over short time periods. This scenario would bring the threat of significant snow accumulations to many of the same regions that just experienced Winter Storm Fern, creating a 1-2 punch of major winter weather events that could overwhelm the capacity of infrastructure and emergency response systems to cope effectively. Areas that receive significant ice accumulation from Winter Storm Fern would be particularly vulnerable to additional winter precipitation loading on already compromised tree branches and power lines. The Southern Track scenario represents another significant concern, as it would bring major winter weather impacts to regions of the Deep South and Gulf Coast that rarely experience such conditions and typically lack the infrastructure and resources necessary to handle repeated major winter weather events. This scenario could affect areas from eastern Texas through the Gulf Coast states and into Florida with significant winter precipitation. A Northern Track scenario would focus the most significant impacts across the Northern Plains, Upper Midwest, and Great Lakes regions, potentially bringing major snow accumulations to cities like Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, and Milwaukee. While these areas are better equipped to handle major winter weather, the potential for blizzard conditions and extremely heavy snow accumulations could still create significant impacts. The extended range forecast models also suggest the possibility of a more complex scenario involving multiple storm centers, or a slow-moving system that could prolong impacts across the affected regions. Slow-moving winter storms often produce higher precipitation totals because they have more time to tap into moisture sources and can create persistent upslope flow patterns that enhance snowfall in certain geographic areas. Regardless of which specific scenario ultimately develops, the atmospheric pattern supporting storm development shows remarkable persistence in the extended range forecasts. This persistence suggests that even if this particular storm system does not fully materialize or tracks in a less impactful manner, the overall pattern will continue to support additional storm development opportunities throughout early February. The implications of another major winter storm so soon after Winter Storm Fern extend far beyond the immediate weather impacts. Many regions affected by the previous storm are still dealing with power outages, infrastructure damage, and compromised emergency response capabilities that would be severely tested by another significant winter weather event. Emergency management officials across potentially affected regions are already expressing concerns about their ability to respond effectively to another major winter storm while still dealing with ongoing recovery efforts from Winter Storm Fern. The deployment of emergency resources, including National Guard units, utility crews, and emergency medical services during the previous storm has left many areas with reduced capacity to respond to additional emergencies. State emergency management agencies from Texas to Maine are conducting rapid assessments of available resources and capabilities, with many discovering that their mutual aid agreements and resource sharing arrangements are already strained to capacity. FEMA has indicated that additional federal resources may be necessary to support state and local response efforts if another major winter storm develops. Utility companies across multiple states are operating with crews that have been working extended hours for days following Winter Storm Fern, raising concerns about worker fatigue and safety during what could be another extended emergency response operation. Many utilities are calling in additional crews from unaffected regions. The financial implications of back-to-back major winter storms are creating concerns among emergency management officials about sustaining prolonged response operations. Many state and local governments have already exceeded their normal winter weather response budgets dealing with Winter Storm Fern, and additional major storm costs could strain emergency funding mechanisms. Transportation systems across the potentially affected regions face particular vulnerability to another major winter storm that could create compounding disruptions across multiple modes of travel. Many airports are still dealing with the backlog of flight cancellations and aircraft repositioning issues created by Winter Storm Fern, with major hub airports reporting that it could take several more days to fully restore normal operations and clear the passenger backlog. The airline industry is already implementing preemptive measures for the potential next storm system, including prepositioning aircraft in less vulnerable locations and extending flight change fee waivers that were implemented during Winter Storm Fern. However, the limited time frame between storm events means airlines may not have sufficient time to fully recover operational capacity. Additional flight cancellations from another major storm could create cascading delays that persist for weeks beyond the immediate weather event, particularly during the busy winter travel season when aircraft utilization rates are high and spare capacity is limited. Highway departments across multiple states are operating with depleted salt and sand supplies following Winter Storm Fern, with many reporting seasonal stockpiles reduced by 40 to 60% in a single storm event. Additional winter weather could find these agencies operating at significantly reduced capacity. Railway operations across the potentially affected regions are implementing enhanced cold weather protocols following operational challenges experienced during Winter Storm Fern. Many rail lines experienced significant delays due to equipment failures in extreme cold conditions. The economic implications of back-to-back major winter storms could be particularly severe for businesses and industries that are still recovering from Winter Storm Fern impacts. Retail operations, manufacturing facilities, and service industries that lost multiple days of operations during the previous storm could face additional significant losses from another major weather event. Agricultural operations across the potentially affected regions face unique challenges from the prospect of another major winter storm. Livestock operations that use significant feed reserves during Winter Storm Fern could face supply shortages if another major storm disrupts transportation and delivery systems. Dairy operations and other facilities with critical infrastructure that suffered damage during the previous storm could face catastrophic losses if additional winter weather prevents repairs. Energy infrastructure across multiple states remains in a compromised condition following Winter Storm Fern, with many utility companies still working to restore service to customers who lost power during the previous storm. Additional ice accumulation or high winds associated with another major storm could cause widespread additional outages in systems that are already stressed and operating with reduced redundancy. The human health and safety implications of another major winter storm in quick succession cannot be overstated. Emergency shelters and warming centers that operated at capacity during Winter Storm Fern may be unable to accommodate additional demand from another major storm. Medical facilities that are still dealing with the aftermath of the previous storm could face overwhelming demand if another weather event creates additional emergency situations. Supply chain disruptions that are still being resolved from Winter Storm Fern could be significantly worsened by another major storm affecting similar geographic regions. Food distribution systems, pharmaceutical supply chains, and other critical logistics networks that were disrupted during the previous storm could face extended interruptions that affect millions of people across multiple states. But perhaps most concerning is how this developing storm threat reveals the fundamental change in the atmospheric pattern that began with Winter Storm Fern and shows no signs of returning to more typical winter conditions anytime soon. The atmospheric pattern analysis suggests that the conditions supporting major storm development will persist well beyond this immediate threat, creating the potential for additional significant winter weather events throughout February and potentially into March. This represents a departure from typical winter weather patterns that feature isolated major storms separated by periods of more moderate conditions. Current ensemble forecasting data suggests that the negative Arctic oscillation pattern that has been driving these extreme weather conditions will maintain its strength through at least mid-February, with some indications that it could persist even longer. This pattern typically takes several weeks to months to break down once established, meaning that the threat of additional major winter storms will continue beyond this immediate developing system. The broader implications of this persistent pattern extend into considerations of seasonal climate normals and long-term weather trends that suggest a fundamental shift in winter weather patterns across North America. The winter of 2026 is shaping up to be one of the most active and impactful winter seasons in recent memory, with potential for multiple major storm events affecting large portions of the United States. Climate scientists are noting similarities between the current atmospheric pattern and historical winters that featured prolonged active weather, including the winter of 1977-1978 that brought repeated major storm systems. These historical analogs suggest that once this type of pattern becomes established, it persists for months rather than weeks. The persistent negative Arctic oscillation pattern driving these extreme conditions is also interacting with other large-scale climate patterns, including La Niña conditions in the Pacific Ocean. These interactions create additional complexity that can enhance winter storm system development. Oceanographic data suggests that current sea surface temperature patterns in both Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are contributing to the persistence of the atmospheric pattern producing these significant winter weather events. Warmer than normal Atlantic temperatures provide enhanced moisture transport for developing storm systems. Weather preparation strategies that work for typical winter seasons may prove inadequate for the extended period of active weather that appears likely to continue throughout winter 2026. Communities, businesses, and individuals may need to adjust their planning approaches to account for repeated major winter weather events. The next 7 to 10 days will be critical for determining whether this potential storm system develops into another major threat. However, the atmospheric pattern supporting its development is so well established that meteorologists are maintaining high confidence that significant weather will develop during this time frame. Monitoring the evolution of this developing situation requires attention to both immediate forecast details and broader pattern trends that will determine whether this represents an isolated threat or the next in a series of major winter weather events that could continue throughout winter 2026. This next major storm system represents more than just another weather event to track. It represents a test of our collective ability to respond to and recover from repeated major weather events occurring within a compressed time frame, revealing vulnerabilities in systems designed for typical weather patterns. The atmospheric setup that could produce this next major storm system demonstrates that Winter Storm Fern was not isolated, but rather the first major manifestation of an atmospheric pattern that could produce multiple significant major weather events throughout winter 2026.